This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. Jonathan Carp lives a conventional life. He has a white-collar job as an engineer in Tacoma, Washington. He's a family man, and he's an active member of his church. But Jonathan has also had an extraordinary life. He served as a combat medic in Iraq. He became an anti-war activist when he returned home. And long before anyone in the media had mentioned it, Jonathan conducted undercover research into what we now call the alt-right. But I think the reason that he's one of the most popular guests on Unregistered, and certainly the reason I had him back on, is that Jonathan makes me think better than anyone I know. So I think I created somewhat of an internet superstar here. Boy, the response to you and that episode, John, it really was something else. I had John for a reason because I knew how smart you were and how interesting you were, but I did not expect that episode to be the second most downloaded episode in the history of Unregistered. It was quite a thing. And that was great, and I loved that, and I'm very grateful for that. But what was really remarkable was how many people then and since then, and this is now, what, 5 months, 4 months? Yeah, have reached out to me and said to me how much that episode moved them and, you know, did things to them emotionally like it did to me. And I've had multiple people say that it was the best podcast of any kind they've ever heard. Wow. And that was, I'll take some credit for that. But it was, all of them talked about how remarkable you were and inspiring in some way. So, well, let's let them all down. Here you are. Now you're going to be really boring. So here's the thing that they don't know. They don't know that I asked you to be on that podcast for a reason we didn't even get to. We didn't even get the main reason. I mean, I certainly wanted you to talk about the stuff you talked about and your experience in Iraq, your experience growing up and being sort of an organic public intellectual. But as you know, but no one else knows, there was something else I really wanted to talk about that we didn't even get to. Actually, there are a few things that we didn't get to that I really wanted to talk about. So we're going to do that today. So last time we left you in Baghdad, and you're a combat medic in the U.S. Army. And you're seeing people die. You're seeing your best friends die and comrades in the army die in front of you. You're trying to save them. You're seeing Iraqis die in horrific ways. And you're describing these things in really remarkable, in ways that only writers, I think, can describe them in with detail and an attention to detail and the power of observation that very few people have. So I think that's why it was so powerful for a lot of people. But that's where we left you. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more though. So you're there and you're seeing these things happen. What happens to you?
Well, I started really wondering about a lot of the reasons why I was there. A lot of really fundamental assumptions that I had made about the world. So as I mentioned last time, I thought that we shouldn't have gone in, but since we were there, we needed to finish the job, that kind of thing. And as I saw the war unfolding and just the kind of absence of any meaning or purpose to anything we were doing, would just seem like this like bureaucratic machine, like flailing. And I started to wonder, like, is what we're trying to do even possible? Like, can this mission succeed? given, infinite resources, could we pull this off? And then I started to wonder, like, well, what are we even trying to pull off? We're trying to make these Iraqis into basically Americans. We're trying to make them do electoral democracy. We're trying to make them do, our version of free market capitalism. And this is just not the way these people live. And it's not that the way we live is better. In fact, I think that the people who sent us there thought the way we live was better. I personally, they live in a particular environment, they have a particular history, and they have a way of life that works for them, and that's great. And going there and trying to shove our way of life down their throat, like it was never in a million years going to work. The only way that we could have achieved anything like our aims in Iraq was just what imperial powers used to do in the bad old days, was just straight out rule by terror and subdue the population. And we weren't prepared to do that, which I think is to our credit as an army. I know if I had been ordered to, shoot civilians, I would not have done it. I don't believe that my soldiers that I was there with would have done it. But I also think that if we're going to evolve past the mechanisms of conquest, we have to evolve past the desire for conquest, because otherwise you're just wasting everyone's time, you're wasting lives, you're wasting money, and you're just getting a lot of people killed to no end. Like Nick Crombie, I love him, God bless him, and his death added up to nothing. ISIS took Fallujah again recently, and then the Iraqis took it back, and I don't know who controls it now. But I realized that we weren't learning essentially from our experiences there, that the army at a low level was adapting, but the high level policymakers just had no idea what they were doing. They were just completely detached from reality in a lot of ways. And so we would, try to do things like, okay, we're going to do presence patrols in this neighborhood, and we're driving around. I used to call them freedom circles, because it was just utterly pointless. Like, are we going to drive around this neighborhood until these people like us? Because I wouldn't like a truckload full of armed dudes driving around my neighborhood, like ever. However long they drove there, I'd never like it. And then the surge happened, and they managed to tamp down the insurgency by basically just putting people everywhere. But it still didn't change anything in Iraq, as we see now. Iraq is still in chaos and disorder, because it is fundamentally like an artificial construction.
What were these freedom circles? I haven't heard about this.
I made that up.
Oh, yeah, no, but so, what was the mission or the operation?
The mission was, they called it a presence patrol. And then I was told by my battery commander that we weren't supposed to do presence patrols anymore. I don't know why, but we would just literally just drive around.
But was it a show of strength or a demonstration of American goodness?
It was both. Okay. I think the idea was to show the bad guys that we were there and we weren't going to go away, and to show the Iraqis the same thing. Like if you work with the thought was the Iraqis are afraid to work with us because they work with us, and then the insurgents come for them and we're not there. So we're just going to be there all the time. Which, go ahead.
Yeah, I never thought about this, but I'm guessing that your presentation, right? The way your uniform looked, your grooming, your use of language, all mattered, I would imagine, right? The particular sunglasses you were wearing, right? Did they stress that? Because
No, we looked terrifying. We looked like an invading, conquering force.
But I mean, didn't they want you to look at least orderly and rational, not like ISIS terrorists?
Yeah, well, they everything came down from the highest levels about everything that we did. But soldiers push back against that kind of thing. Like, they wanted us to wear all this body armor, and we were like, well, I can't move in this. I can't run. I can't do anything. So we would strip it down as much as we could get away with. But I don't know firsthand that details of our uniform were designed to a particular end. But I mean, the bulletproof sunglasses they issued us were, designed a particular way. They looked like,
those are bulletproof?
Well, there's a picture the Army would send around of they shot some with a 12-gauge shotgun, and you can see the lead pellets embedded in all of them. Yeah. Huh. And they look like, Terminator wraparound scary sunglasses. And I'm sure that's deliberate, but I don't know.
Huh. I'm just thinking about, there were some lessons learned in the Vietnam War, and certainly in colonialism. But in the Vietnam War, one of the big problems was that a lot of the American GIs were smoking weed and doing coke and had long hair and were hanging out the backs of trucks and whistling at women as they drove by. and drinking whiskey and being drunk on the job, right? And showing a very bad example.
Oh no, we were supposed to be, I should say, a very disciplined and professional force. Alcohol was absolutely forbidden. Right. Not to say soldiers didn't get it, but it was absolutely forbidden. Drugs, of course, were absolutely forbidden. We had to maintain our haircuts all the time. We had to be clean shaven all the time. And sometimes soldiers would get annoyed and push back on it because they're out doing like war stuff all day, and then they come back and somebody yells at them about like, why haven't you been to get a haircut? Well, because I've been getting shot at all day. Like, leave me alone. But yeah, it was definitely. I think there was definitely a push to make sure that the American force presented a highly professional appearance at all times.
Yep. Yeah, so the look and the demeanor of the GIs in Vietnam undercut that mission in two ways, right? One, they're nothing to emulate, right? You're sort of saying, well, we're here to make your society better. Well, except that our people look like a bunch of fucking hippies, right?
Yeah.
So it sort of undercuts the moral purpose of that. And secondly, it to be an imperial power, you need to have moral power. There has to be sort of a moral monopoly in a way. And that's what the United States has been banking on for a long time. That's the only way to justify all these bases all around the world, is that we're better than everyone else, right? Well, if you have a bunch of hippies, doing this mission for you, it kind of undercut that justification. So just you saying this is the first time it's occurred to me. That's actually one of the lessons that was learned after Vietnam that was employed in Iraq. Makes perfect sense that they understood that you guys had to look clean and professional and orderly and rational and sober.
And I think intimidation was a part of it too.
Yeah, of course.
We were supposed to look scary, and I didn't look scary. I looked like a big dweeb because I'm a big dweeb. But there were a lot of guys that I deployed with. I look at old pictures and man, they look scary. Like if that dude was walking down my street, I wouldn't fuck with them at all.
Well, you are what, 6'4"?
I'm 6'6".
6'6".
Yeah.
You're scared. I mean, I would have been scared of you. I'm still a little scared of you. Yeah. So you actually started, the very first thing you said was that this wouldn't work, that those people don't live the way we want them to live, and they're just not going to live the way we want them to live. And my first thought was, they're kind of pre-modern, right? And that's a big part of it, or maybe that's the whole thing here.
I think that you could say that, although there are there are aspects of I don't know, saying modern implies like up to date. And I would say instead of modern, like what we call modern is just the way like Europeans and European descendant cultures live right now. Right. And they're not that. They're modern Arabs.
Western modern is what I meant. Yeah. That's right. So they're not Western modern.
Yeah, no.
Well, that's the first thing you started talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting given what else we're going to talk about.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
See where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Yeah.
No one else does, but we know. So, I think you're right about that. But you entered the Army and you went to war thinking that not only that it would work, that you could convert these people into good Western moderns, but that we should, right?
Yeah. Because I thought that the way that we lived was like obviously the best. Because what I didn't understand that I'm trying to understand now is that our society has particular fundamental values that we are inculcated with at a very young age, and that we don't think about or question. Like if people like, I was just reading an article the other day. It was arguing that the Industrial Revolution was like the most significant event in the history of the world, and it had all these measures of material well-being to point to this as being like the most important thing.
That's so important,
right? Well, it is to us.
Which once again, you're making me think, John. Keep
going. Yeah, but I love the thing is
measurement.
Think about so this
units of measurement. Yeah,
yeah.
How we measure. Yeah,
we measure things, and we measure. It's easier to measure material things. I mean, I'm an engineer, and that's all I do is measure material things, and we can do incredible things with measuring material things. But if you look at that measure, we're going to look at the material wealth of society, right? Think about everything that is lost in that measurement. Think about the whole history of humanity from the earliest days of the Stone Age to, when James Watt invents the steam engine. Things change a lot. People's lives change. The way society structure changed. The way they structure their families have changed. But because they're not wealthier, the argument goes like it's not as important as when we had the Industrial Revolution, and that was when real change started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what we can't, or what can't be measured by these means of measurement don't count for as much.
Right. Yeah. And
we don't value them.
We don't value them. And they do. I think a lot of pre-moderns do value them immensely. I mean, you look at pre-modern Europe, the Crusades, like what in the world? One of the things that amuses me is looking up like Marxist explanations of the Crusades, because they have to make a materialist explanation, right? Yeah. And it's just insane. Like there's no materialistic explanation for the Crusades. The explanation for the Crusades is that these people believed that they needed to go and liberate the Holy Land because Christ walked there and people who denied Christ were ruling it, and it moved a whole society.
What is the Marxist explanation? Spice routes or something?
Spice route? I don't know. They come up with all kinds of crazy ones. If I'd known we were going to talk about it, I'd have pulled up a little collection, but it's just there's trade routes. Oh, there's the inherent conflict. Like they had the way their production was structured. Like the younger people didn't have access to the means of production, so they had to have something to do with them. So the ideological superstructure sent them off to do
surplus labor.
Things. Yeah, surplus
labor. The deployment of surplus labor.
All kinds of weird stuff. But of course, what they don't do is like, what did the Crusaders say? Like, what was their motivation? And their motivation was like they were fighting for
their stated motivation.
Yeah, right. And I think people know why they do things. Like I know that is a very counterintuitive notion in our society today. But I think if you want to know why somebody's doing something, you should ask him, and he'll probably tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, I just had this argument just the other day because I was making an argument about the motivation of American imperialists, basically, in the early 20th century. And if you look at what they say, it's 95% humanitarian mission. It's 95% we are superior and we need to spread our beneficence throughout the world. We need to uplift these people and make their lives better for them. They can't do it themselves. They need our help, so we're going to invade their countries. 5%, I grant, is, yes, there also happen to be big markets in China. That's why we're going into the Philippines, or that's a reason we're going to the Philippines. But the vast majority of the time, these imperialists, and by the way, this is in private conversations, in private communications, and in public communications, are saying it's because we are the fathers and they are the children, and we and children need our help.
Yeah.
It's humanitarian. So, and I said, we need to take that seriously.
Yeah.
With this person who was arguing with me, oh no, it was all about economics. I said, it definitely was about economics, because to be a father, and here we go again. This ties into your story too. To be an effective father, you got to have some money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
you do.
You have to have economic power, don't you? Otherwise, you have nothing to hold over your children. There's no way to maintain control. Well, it's about maintaining control, right?
You can't give them opportunities either.
You can't control the family.
Well, I don't know that I control my family.
Don't you?
They would probably dispute the idea that I control the family. I mean, I'm not tyrannical.
If you lost all of your money and all of your means of income, wouldn't it be more likely that you would not have a family?
It would be more likely that I wouldn't have a family.
Yeah,
starting from now, no. Like if I got hit by a car on my way home and couldn't work, I would still have my wife and children.
If you lost all of your money and your job and a means of making an income, and your wife, on the other hand, found a really lucrative job and was making all the money and lots of money. Mm-hmm. Oh, and then your kids too got in on the action too. She hired them and employed them and gave them some of the value that she creates. And then they have all the money. And then how are you going to be the dad, John?
I don't know.
Well, I would. There's Teddy Roosevelt's problem.
Yeah.
Is my point here. Right. So, I mean, they understood that. I mean, they said, well, in other words, for me, the argument is, and this is what they themselves said, Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, all said, we need to be, and we should be, and we want to be the fathers of the world. We want to uplift the people and help them. But the only way to do that is through economic power. So that's why we have to control things like trade routes and spice routes and oil routes and all the rest of it. So okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm agreeing with you. That was a long-winded way of saying that, yes, you're right. I think that their primary motivation is Christian. How about that?
I don't know about that. I think it's Protestant.
Oh.
I think.
Okay, keep going.
Because the Protestants, Max Weber talks about how the Protestants are searching for specifically the Calvinists, I should say, are searching for signs that they are elect. And one of the signs of being elect is that you are have prosperity, right? And so the motivation to go out and uplift the whole world. I'm kind of losing my train of thought here.
Yeah, the evangelical impulse.
Yeah, the evangelical
injunction, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, so they have their religious ideology is tied closely to a particular cultural way of being, because they understand whether or not they are saved through their as Weber argues, through signs of salvation, through signs of being elect, signs of material prosperity. And so they want to go out and have everybody else do that. And I think that there is, if your goal is to maximize your material prosperity, that we can look at history and determine objective ways of doing that, ways, cultural norms that will promote material prosperity. And so they go out and they want to spread this idea, but it's not, I don't think it's Christian in the sense that, the broader Christian tradition, like the Orthodox didn't do this. The Catholic countries, if you look at Catholic imperialism, it functions differently than Protestant countries' imperialistic designs.
Okay. I mean, that was my first thought, was all these Spanish-speaking Catholics running around the world.
Right, but here's the thing. Okay. Go to Mexico. You talk to the people. What color are they? They're brown, right? They're descended from the indigenous Americans, right? I'm not descended from indigenous Americans. I don't think you're descended from indigenous Americans. If you look at countries that were colonized by Protestants, they're not.
Oh,
they push everyone out of the way.
Oh, you know what? You know this better than I do. This guy that we both are huge fans of, but for different reasons. Anthony Esselin.
Yeah.
Tony Esselin. I think this is his argument, right?
I
think he makes the argument that the Catholic Church respects diversity. Yes.
Yeah, it does.
Much more, or simply does respect diversity, unlike Protestant denominations and Protestant imperialists and evangelicals. That's right. That's his argument.
And so I can bring it back so I don't sound as dumb as I did a minute ago. The Protestants see salvation as indicated by a particular way of life, indicated by the consequences of this particular way of life. So if you're not doing that, then they don't think that you have any religious value. You're not one of the elect. Whereas in the Catholic Church, we think that you can, how do I put this? It's not that you can save yourself. Christ saves you.
Right.
But you, as St. Paul says, you work out your salvation with fear and trembling. You participate in the process. And so it's not if you're not this, you're just screwed thing. Whoever you are in life, whatever is going on with you, whatever kind of person you are, the means of salvation in the Catholic Church is open to you. You can be baptized. You can receive the sacraments. And because in Protestantism, there's no explicit, this is the means of salvation, here's what you do. It's just, I'm looking for these signs that I'm one of the, I keep saying Protestantism. I should be saying Calvinism. There are Protestants who are not Calvinists.
There you go. Yeah. That's what I was thinking too. Okay.
Because they're looking for these signs of election, and they understand these signs in a particular cultural context. So it's all a bundle for them. It's all a package deal.
Right. Yeah. Calvinism. Right. So I'm thinking of this whole debate about, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the debate about works versus grace, what you do in this world will send you to heaven. No, they said it's grace. And who determines whether you are granted grace and go to heaven? God and only God. And how do we know who has grace and who doesn't? Well, we just find out. And what you're saying is that little opening there, that lacuna that, is unanswered is answered by looking at what ends up happening to these people in the real world. Like all these Puritans in New England become merchants and become wealthy and have large houses and big fortunes. And then we look at them and say, oh, well, they must be the ones who have grace. And then guess what they end up doing? Literally, specifically, they go down south and they reform your people, John.
Yeah, they want to make us
Southerners.
better. Yeah.
They make the Southerners into Yankees and Puritans. And then where else do they go after that? They go to the Philippines and do the same thing there, and on and on and on.
Yeah.
Cool argument, dude.
I guess. I if I hadn't been drinking earlier, I might have made it a little better.
No, I think I think you're right. No, I'm just thinking about the Catholics, right? Because we have about 1,500 years of Catholic imperialism and colonialism before then to account for. And so what you said to me that I don't know much at all about, but I've heard a little bit about from Anthony Esselin, who, by the way, used to teach at Providence College and just was, by his telling, forced out, and I don't think that's wrong, by the incursion of politically correct professors who have made Providence College, which is a Catholic college, into a redoubt of SJWs, and now he has gone to a little dinky Orthodox Catholic. I don't know, what do you call Thomas More
so
College?
I would say it's a traditionalist.
Okay, traditionalist Catholic college in New Hampshire.
Or another word to put it would be actually Catholic college.
Yeah, just brief side note. So I actually want to have Anthony Esolen on this show, and I hopefully will someday, because here's what the thing about him, and he does, it is important to bring him up in talking to you because you have some things in common with him. I have tremendous respect for him, and I have really nothing bad to say about him. Now, his values, his political values, his social values, his cultural values are the exact opposite of mine. Exact opposite. He wants to live in a world that is pretty much a dystopian nightmare for me. And I am positive he would say the same thing about me.
Yeah.
However, as far as I know, he is interested only in maintaining a particular part of the actual world as such, and not interested in coming to my house and making me live like a traditionalist Catholic.
Yeah.
And that's his whole argument against Providence College and what's been going on at Providence College within the Catholic Church more broadly, and within higher education more broadly as well. He's saying, hey, hello, we had these schools, this is our church. We had a culture there that we established, and now you're telling us that we are immoral for being Catholic, which is actually what's happened to him and Catholic professors at Catholic schools. This is true, by the way. Everyone should look into this. Providence College and Notre Dame, it's happening everywhere. You have these secular people coming into those Catholic colleges because they can't find enough Catholic professors to teach there. So they have to hire secular people to teach. And of course, they bring in that culture that we know and love from the regular colleges. And they're now being told that Catholicism is immoral because, for instance, it teaches against gay marriage and homosexuality and birth control and all the rest of it. So my position is, even though I am 1000% pro birth control, pro abortion, pro as much gay sex as is possible in the world, pro drag queens, you name it, I have total respect for them, and I want them to have those spaces. I want everyone to have a space in which they can live how they want to live. So anyway,
so I think the difference,
crucial.
The reason that you sense a commonality between yourself and Anthony Esolen, and perhaps between you and myself, respect, is because as wrong as Anthony Esolen and myself would say you are about a lot of things, you're after the truth. Whether or not you think, then now you think the truth is that there is no truth, but you're fundamentally honest in this pursuit.
Oh yeah.
Don't,
that's it. Yeah.
You don't, Solzhenitsyn said, live not by lies. And you, Anthony Esolen, you don't live by lies. Exactly. And I think that there is a strain of leftism in our society that does live essentially by lies. They whatever facts are necessary to push their agenda become a facts, and whatever facts are inconvenient for their agenda just don't exist. And that's I like you, I respect you. I think Anthony Esolen would, because you are sincere. The difference is sincerity, really. The difference is, are you acting in good faith and willing to go wherever the evidence takes you, or do you have your positions and you're willing to twist the evidence to fit them?
Acting in good faith. Nice choice of words.
Yeah.
But yes, that's right. I think that's right. I think it is his sincerity, and I'd like to think that I am as sincere as he certainly seems to be. I want everyone to hear this. Certainly you don't want to say that only the left is lying.
No.
Yeah, I don't.
Not at all.
I think that conservatives and Trumpists and all sorts of right-wingers lie all the time in similar ways. Once again, the reason that I care so much about left-wing lies, well, there's two reasons. One is that that's my world. Those are the people I live with, and they still have tremendous power over my life in all sorts of ways.
Well, the left is...
And two, they are, this is just a fact, they are the most educated in a formal sense people in this country. Okay. So they should know better, and they do know better, right? But anyway, yes, sincerity. Wow. Back to, I don't want to... Before I forget this, though.
Yep, sure.
Pre-modern people in Iraq that you encounter, and you have guns and they don't, or they have fewer guns.
Yeah, they didn't have as many.
A lot fewer and not as powerful. And you thought when you got there that they should be converted to modern ways, and that you could convert them. And you found pretty quickly, and apparently the rank and file soldiers on the ground realized that before the brass did?
I hesitate to speak for my fellow soldiers. A number of them still believe in what they were there trying to do, and think that if they had been they feel, and I'm not going to defend this position, I'm just saying what it is. They feel that they were undercut and sold out by the political leadership, and that we left Iraq prematurely, and that we could have completed the mission. I think they're wrong. I think that you cannot. So one of the things I talked about in the last episode was this individualization and homogenization of our culture in the West. Mm-hmm. The Iraqis are not anywhere near that. Their family ties are very, 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 very important to them. They live, some of them, I hate to generalize, but the ones that I saw, their extended family units are very important to them. They live and the head of that extended family unit has real power.
Yep.
Like, he matters. When my family all gets together, we're respectful to our elders. But if my Uncle Philip told me what he thought I should do with my career, I would just be like, thanks for the advice, Uncle Philip, whatever. But if in their culture, if the elder tells you should do this, like, okay, I'll do it. And in some of them are different. I hate to generalize, but it's like going back. God, I hate to say going back, but I'm just going to say it. It's like if you went back to medieval Europe and tried to make them live like a capitalist lifestyle, it would be just incomprehensible to them. Yeah. And it was to the Iraqis. They don't do that sort of thing. And I think that the way they do things is fine for them. I think it might be, some of the things they do might be better for us.
That's what I was wondering. If you actually saw some things in the way they live that you find to be preferable.
So I would say and I guess I'm biased in this because I'm the father and the head of a family, but the loyalty that the younger generation showed to the older generations, the care that the older generations showed for the younger generation. There wasn't, there didn't seem to be, like in our society, an age where you're just like, all right, you're on your own, you're your own little thing, and we'll see you at Christmas. But like, don't come talk to me. Like, don't like it. If I called my uncle, I don't want to pick on my Uncle Philip. I love him. But if I called him and asked for money, it'd be weird and awkward, right? Because that's just not what we do, right? Mm-hmm. But in that sort of society, if a younger member of the family needs money and another member of the family has money, it would be awkward if they didn't provide for the family, if they didn't look after their own and didn't look after each other.
Yeah. So when you got to the Army, you were how old?
23, I think. Yeah, 23.
And were you sort of a loner at that point?
Kinda. I had my friends from high school, but I wasn't super close to anybody, really.
And you were sort of close to your parents, but not really. And they lived apart, very far apart.
Yeah.
So there wasn't much of a family unit for you.
No, so maybe that's what I was looking for. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of been always the theory about me.
Yeah.
And why I've done the things. Because I was hardcore going to have 3 kids and be married and live in the same house for the rest of my life. And that was the whole dream. I don't know. It's a cool story, dude.
Yes.
Well, because I've changed so much. But I'm just curious about that. That may have been, well, I guess we did touch on this the last time.
Yeah. I think so, yeah.
But yeah, I don't think we talked about your potential admiration or possible admiration of Iraqis and their way of life.
Well, and the just fanatical determination of some of them to refuse to have their country dominated by a foreign power.
Yeah.
And they would do just crazy things, just stupid, crazy things. Just, stand up in an open field and spray an armored convoy with an AK-47, which is, I mean, you may as well just shoot yourself, but they did not want us in their country. And I can't blame them. I'm not bitter about it, because I wouldn't want a foreign occupying army in my country.
Yeah, but would you take up arms?
Absolutely.
Risk your life?
Absolutely.
Would you really?
I absolutely would.
I'm quite sure I would not.
I would in a second, because to be occupied is humiliating. It is humiliating to be unable to protect your own family. I think this is a big part of why, like the unrest we see in St. Louis, it isn't, I think that the details of this incident or that incident is less important than the fact that I think, and I hate to speak for them, but I think that in a large extent, the inner city Black community feels occupied. And whether or not a given cop is justified in shooting a given Black male is less important than that is an outsider. He's here abusing and disrespecting me and my people. He's, degrading me in the eyes of my family, and I can't do anything about it. And that's just, if I think about it, it would enrage me. So I'm sure it enraged the Iraqis. I imagine it probably enrages, our African-American friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So modern anthropology was largely founded on the idea that modern society was a rejection of what you are describing, which the anthropologists called an honor culture, a culture of honor in which this kind of thing matters. It's not material wealth. It's not one's formal standing in the greater society. It's just that there's a hierarchy here. There's a father and a mother and children and aunts and uncles and Uncle Philip even. And you simply honor people according to that status as it's sort of been handed down traditionally. And any violation of that, any violation or abridgment of your status is the worst offense in a way. It is, it's an existential threat.
Yeah.
Because that's how your society, whether it's in St. Louis or in Baghdad, is arranged, is organized. And that's all you've got, really.
Yeah. Well, you asked earlier.
So that actually justified, and I've been saying, I've been laying out this thing that I'm writing over the last several episodes, but this is another piece of it. That was one of the justifications for World War II, is that these anthropologists said, we've got to go to war with these they thought the Nazis and the Imperial Japan were pre-modern in this way, and they were, and it's true, they were basically honor cultures. We've got to eliminate them from the face of the earth and replace them with what's better, which is our modern Western culture.
Yeah.
So, which is not based on honor, but based on rational things, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Like money.
Money. Well, you can measure money. You can't measure honor.
And inches and feet and pounds and tons.
Yeah. Well, you asked earlier, like if you lost all of production, if you lost all your economic power, how would you maintain your authority in the family, right? Yeah. And I think that's I hope, I can't predict the future, but I hope that's exactly how, is my children would honor me as their father. And if I was an incapacitated cripple, they would still honor me as their father, as I honor my father as my father and my mother as my mother, regardless of our relative earning potential or our relative social status.
John, my worst fear is dying alone.
Yeah? Yeah. I wouldn't want to do that.
Dying alone. No, my worst fear is just living the last years of my life alone and not honored or even cared about by anybody. Yeah. That is my worst fear.
Well, I think that's a natural, like, human instinct. People don't want to be alone.
I don't know about natural, but it certainly is common.
You don't think anything is natural.
I don't. But I certainly agree that it's very, very common, and I certainly agree that it is my worst fear. I mean, I'm talking about there is blindness, drowning in the ocean, being burned alive, being buried underground, and then, but worse than that is spending the end of my life alone and with no one caring about me.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like hell.
So there's two ways you can avoid that fate, that horrible fate, and I do think it'd be pretty bad. You can make a whole lot of money, right? And so that people basically are compelled through economic need or desire to be nice to you. That's number one. And B is to live in a society in which we all operate according to this honor code, essentially, where we respect our elders and we take care of them until they are dead.
And I think it's important.
And even after they're dead.
I mentioned that the obligations go both ways. The elders in a properly functioning honor culture are obliged to look out for their juniors. You care for your children, you care for your little nieces and nephews, your cousins. You look out for them and they honor you. And then when they're young and helpless, you do everything for them. And then when you're old and helpless, they do everything for you. It's a reciprocal relationship. It's not just you better do everything your daddy says because he's your daddy. Your daddy has to do what he's supposed to do, and you do what you're supposed to do. And that's how society functions.
That's exactly right. That's exactly how even the anthropologists who hated it and wanted to annihilate it and did a pretty good job of annihilating it described it. They said it's a paternalism, but paternalism is not oppression. It is right. It's exactly what you just said. These anthropologists who hated this system did say it's a two-way street. Even, by the way, in slavery, right? The slave owners usually thought of themselves as fathers, basically, to the slaves, and they felt an obligation They did. I mean, they said this. Now, you don't have to believe what they said because, they're evil slave masters and all. But they really said this. And it's true because the slaves mostly said it too, that the slave owners, now, obviously, they weren't doing everything that they could have for their slaves, no doubt about it. But they did feel an obligation to take care of them.
Yeah.
And a lot of them took care of their slaves better than they took care of their white slave drivers, that the whites who worked for them.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, it's damn though. Good argument, John.
Thanks, I guess.
I'm just thinking though, I want a third way. Like capitalism, and this is one of my major beefs with these libertarians.
The third way is going to get you tarred as an evil Nazi.
Let's work it out. We have about an hour and a half to go. We can do it. We can fit. I want to find a third way right now with you. I'm serious.
All right.
I'm serious. So, this is one of the things that libertarians just don't talk about, and it pisses me off. But you nail it. Capitalism is awesome in a lot of ways. It is indisputable. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have stuff. And everybody in the world, even the poorest among us, have stuff that we wouldn't have without capitalism. It has created things that are essentially miracles in all of our lives that we use. There's a miracle in my hand right now. It's called a smartphone. And we're sitting really at a miracle, which is a glass-covered table. And we're also in another miracle, which is that we are on the 9th floor of a hotel in downtown Portland. All those things are miracles according to the pre-modern person, according to the pre-capitalist person, if you had said that these things would ever exist in the world. Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you, capitalism. And I mean that. On the other hand, it causes me, at least, I'm just going to speak for myself here, unbelievable, pretty much nonstop grinding anxiety and this pretty constant terror of being really alone, because you kind of are alone anyway.
Yeah.
Even when you got people around you in capitalism, you're at least expected to behave as if you're alone, aren't you, John?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Because that's how you're not supposed to expect Philip to bail you out or anyone to bail you out, your uncle or anybody to bail you. You got to make it. That's the culture of capitalism.
In defense of Uncle Philip, if I were really in need, I have no doubt he would help.
Right.
But
because you're pre-modern. We know because you're from Louisiana. We already established that. So no, I'm serious. And so that's why I understand the appeal of socialism, actually.
Yeah. Well, I get the appeal too. And it goes back a long way. Cicero writes about he's living in a time when there's all this class conflict. And he writes about an order that he wants.
Who and when and where Cicero
all right, so
was.
Cicero is a Roman statesman from the 1st century BC. He that's really all you need to know about him. He lived in Rome. He was, I guess something else you should know about him is that while he was in the ruling class, he was not of the ruling class. He was born outside the city and was always kind of seen as a climber, social climber type. And he argued and he thought that the solution to all of the problems Rome was having was for the upper class to take their obligations to the lower class seriously, and the lower class to take their obligations to the upper class seriously. Yeah. And that we should have this, that hierarchy is unavoidable, but that it doesn't have to be toxic and it doesn't have to be brutal and exploitative. And if it is brutal and exploitative, then it is invariably a unstable situation. And then that is, I think, like the fundamental actual right-wing argument. Like the historical right wing is saying hierarchy is unavoidable. People should accept their obligations in the hierarchy and fulfill them as best they can. And the left-wing argument, which I think absolutely dominates all of the American political spectrum, from Donald Trump all the way to Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren, and even further to the Marxists and so forth, is that everyone should be as close to absolutely equal in status as they can. We should be levelers. We should be, it's liberalism with a big capital L. And I forget what we were talking about before.
No, you got it. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I was just going to say really quickly, that I'm pretty sure is Jordan Peterson's whole project. I don't know if you follow him.
I've listened to 4 of his podcasts. My older son is super into him. Listens to all of his stuff.
I'm pretty sure that's his project, is to essentially revive and defend what we're calling honor culture or pre-modern culture, this thing about hierarchy and order and respecting hierarchy and order. And I mean, the claim that he's making, the argument is an argument, and it's a very elaborate argument that I definitely respect. But again, like with Esalen, however you pronounce it. It's the opposite of what I want, I think, but it's a hell of a good argument, so I respect it, is that it's a good thing. It's a better way to live. So I'm pretty sure Peterson is claiming that it is not sort of inherently, absolutely, naturally, biologically good. I think his argument is simply that it has been proven to be a preferable way to organize society than what liberalism has given us.
Well, I think you talked about anxiety in capitalism.
Yeah, constant.
The most rigidly hierarchical institution I was ever in was obviously the army. I had a lot of problems in the army, a lot of issues, a lot of so forth. But what I didn't have was anxiety.
Yeah.
I had no anxiety. I knew exactly where I belonged. I knew exactly what I was supposed to be doing.
Yep.
And because we've gotten rid of all that, because now you're born and it's just do whatever you want. I mean, it's getting to the point now where it's like, what gender do you want to be? There are no fixed anythings that you can say, this is what I am, and that's where I'm going.
Right, which pisses off Jordan Peterson more than anything else. Yeah.
And it provokes anxiety in people because I know obviously we disagree on this, but I think that people are things. People are a particular thing. You are not this disembodied absolute mind that can do anything to the body it happens to inhabit and it be fine. You're a particular kind of thing, and you will be happiest when you are living the way the most consistent with the thing that you are. And as we have gotten rid of all the indicators in society of what you are, people get more and more anxious. They don't know what to do with themselves. Literally, like they don't know.
So you sound like Plato, right? Is this the Plato's argument that we are born a particular way in a particular thing? Our destiny, we are born into our destiny? Is that right?
I mean, I guess I don't think it's as rigid as Plato. Like I don't think you can be as schematic as Plato is. And he's got these, I don't have like a list of castes that we should be organized into. But I think that you should, I mean, like Socrates said, know yourself, right? And we have made it deliberately, for whatever reason, very hard for people to know themselves. We hide facts from themselves about people, and we pretend that everyone is born on an equal playing field, and we're not. I was never going to go to Harvard. Never in a million years was I going to go to Harvard.
What?
I was born a working class white kid in rural nowhere. The odds of me, whatever my IQ may have been, whatever I might have done in school, the odds of me going to Harvard were infinitesimal. Nobody ever should have held that out in front of me.
Wait a minute. So now you're just fucking stupid, Jonathan.
Okay, sure.
You're not saying that you're not smart enough.
No. I'm not saying that I'm not smart enough.
Well, that's Plato's argument. I mean,
that's Plato's argument. It's not my argument.
Well, but that's okay, fine. Okay, you're not making an essentialist argument. You're making a class argument.
Right, but I don't think that you can,
because you're obviously smarter than most people who went to Harvard.
If the criteria for going to Harvard was IQ, I could have gone to Harvard. I don't think the criteria for going to Harvard is IQ. I think the criteria for going to Harvard is being in the social class and exhibiting the kind of personality traits that the ruling class wants to elevate into itself.
Oh, yeah.
And, I did not have those personality traits. Now we can go back and forth about when I lost them or why I didn't develop them or whatever. Yeah. But it was never going to happen.
Okay. So you and I have a choice right now. Okay. We could spend the next 16 hours debating nature versus nurture. Okay. That's option number one.
Okay.
Option number two is to leave that aside for the moment and just say whether it is a social construct or inborn or natural, the traditional hierarchies in Western society in particular, but I guess even in Eastern society, are simply a better way to live according to many of our own standards than the way that modern liberalism has organized society.
I think
that, I'm pretty sure, is basically Jordan Peterson's argument.
I think so.
And I totally respect that. I'm pretty sure it's Anthony Esalen's argument also. Totally respect that. And it sounds like it's your argument too.
I think
it doesn't matter if it's natural or inborn or biological, right? It's just, they don't care. What they just want to do is reorganize society along those lines because they think it makes people happier.
It does. I think it does.
There you go.
It demonstrably
I
does.
am all for that. I'm all for hearing that argument. I'm really serious about that.
Okay.
So why?
Why does it make people happier?
Yeah.
Well, because, all right, so I want to make my argument. I don't know Anthony Esalen's argument or Jordan Peterson's argument, but I think that, like I said, like you are born into a particular place in society, whether that is because of unjust social conditions or genetics or whatever, you're born into a particular place. That particular place heavily determines the options that are open to you in society. And if you understand that from an early age, you don't waste your life grasping at things you're never going to get. Like, we have a society full of people, you read about it all the time, they have PhDs in the humanities and so forth. And they're like, gosh, I did all this work. Why can't I get a job that pays well? Well, you weren't born into the social class that teaches at Harvard, and you're never going to teach at Harvard. And you're going to be an adjunct at a community college. And somebody should have told you this earlier in life.
What about those of us who were born into the Harvard stream?
Then you should understand that your obligation is to look at the well-being of the people who are further down in society and understand that they themselves can know and understand what their well-being is, and that you should essentially cultivate the conditions that will allow them to live the life that has been allotted to them, and not continually try to remake and rearrange everything.
And that's going to make me happier, or it's just something that I should do?
I don't know. Happiness is...
I need happiness.
The key to happiness is understanding that your happiness is not important. That the important thing is to fulfill your obligations.
Oh, so you're not promising happiness?
I'm not promising anything. No. Nobody's... what are you promised in life? Death. That's what you're promised.
So what? Okay. So wait, is there any transaction at all here? Do I get anything from this?
Well, yeah, I believe and know, and from my own experience, and which is just anecdotal, that when you put yourself aside and look at where am I at right now? What are my obligations? And you focus on fulfilling them the best you can. Happiness flows from that.
Oh, so I do get happiness.
I think now. Okay. I'm not promising you anything.
Yeah, no. Okay, I just want to be clear about what you're proposing here. Yeah, no. And so I think that's Peterson and Easeland's argument. Yeah, that it will just generate. We will get happiness. I was going to say that. Another argument you can make against the people who are born into the Harvard stream, right, like salmon, is that they're never going to get to the top of the stream.
Yeah.
Because even when you are born into, let's say, the Kennedys, right, you're probably never going to get to where you're supposed to get, which is even higher than Jack got. Yeah. You're going to, you need to, right? I think the Kennedys sort of demonstrate this beautifully, because every one of them has gone into politics seemingly, and none of them have gotten as high as another Kennedy has gotten. They've all basically failed.
Yeah. By their standards. Yeah.
Yeah. Teddy Kennedy failed. He was in the United States Senate for 40 years, 50 years, right? Was arguably the most important United States senator in the second half of the 20th century, and one of the most important American politicians ever. He failed. Everybody who talks about, and I don't just mean like Chappaquiddick and blah, blah, blah. I mean just that he never achieved the status of his brother.
Yeah. But why do you see him as a failure? Because you don't see him as born into a particular social role and did he fulfill it well or not. You see him as he's supposed to climb the greasy pole as high as he possibly can. And that's what everyone's supposed to do. And so, people who are street sweepers, you look at them and say, well, that person didn't succeed. You look at Ted Kennedy and he wasn't the president. He didn't succeed. Now, I've got my own issues with Ted Kennedy, but he was a senator. He was born into the governing class and he governed for 40 odd years. He did what he was, I guess you could say, supposed to do.
Right. He also drank all day, every day.
Oh yeah. I'm sure he was a mess. I don't know a lot about Ted Kennedy.
I'm just wondering. I do think that what we are told in this society is keep climbing.
Yeah.
Keep climbing. Get up. When you fail, get up and keep fighting, keep working, keep going. That's America, right?
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
The ethos of America. Keep going. I'm always like, in the back of my mind, it's like, that's really good advice. Yeah, I love that. It helps me when I get something really bad happens in my life. Just get up and keep going. It has actually gotten me through crises in my own life. In a way, I basically just followed that American rule, and it's helped. But then in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, do I ever get to just stop?
Yeah. Well, I think the difference, I think that the keep going ethos is good if it's directed at the right end. If your end is like I'm a husband and a father. So what does keep going mean for me? Does it mean like, gosh, I'm not, as far up in the company as I want to be. I better, get mad at myself and work harder. No, like I need to keep going and keep fulfilling my duties.
I think that's the point of the American ethos. There is no end.
Right. But that's because we're all aiming at our own happiness. And that's a target you can't hit if you're aiming at it.
Well, yeah, I'm not even sure Americans, when they talk in this way, think about happiness. They just want, Americans historically and still today, I think, just want us to keep going.
Yeah.
That's it. I actually think that is the purpose of a good American. This is actually a new thought I'm having right here, because this is what you do to me. I've been thinking and reading and studying American culture for my whole life, but but I think it's right that happiness is not even a concept if there is such a thing as traditional American discourse and sort of the construction of the good American citizen, right? Mm-hmm. I think it is just to keep going up, though.
Yeah,
keep going up, and you just keep going. You keep going. And I, especially these days, now that I'm sort of an entrepreneur and, starting a new business and being a good American in that way, it's like, I love a lot of it. I do. But I also feel like I'm on a treadmill that's no one's ever going to turn it off.
Yeah.
The gym will not close. Yeah. The janitor will never come and turn off and switch off the treadmill. And there's a cage also in the treadmill, so I can't even get off if I wanted to.
Yeah.
And I have to keep running on that treadmill at 6.3 or whatever forever. Yeah, right? I mean, I think
well, because you can't just accept, in America, you're not supposed to just be like, here's where I am in life and I'm okay with it, and I'm just going to do this.
I keep thinking, when I hit X dollars a year in income, this is my current thinking, right? Then I'll be fine. And then I can just coast and I'll be good. And that might be true. I don't know. I might be built that way and that might happen, but I kind of doubt it. I think that when I hit that, there's just going to be another plateau to reach.
Well, there's something else you can't do, like we recently in our family, like, doubled our annual income. My wife and I both finished school. And so before, when we were both in school and living on my GI Bill, it was like, gosh, I sure wish we had enough money to go out to eat at Applebee's, because we're broke as a joke and we're eating leftover spaghetti. But then now we have this money, and it would be easy to be like, gosh, I can't go eat at, the fanciest restaurants in New York. I need to keep trying to climb the ladder and get further, there's always something you can't have. Mm-hmm. And as long as you're trying to you define your success by the things that you have, then you're never going to stop. There's always there are things that Bill Gates can't have, and you just keep.
I don't even think it's necessarily, I know people talk about this and I don't think it's wrong, but I'm not even sure it's necessarily material accumulation that Americans want you to acquire or to achieve. It is simply, I really do think this now, just moving forward. So here's how I know.
Okay.
I've been reading a bunch of American imperialist writings, speeches, essays, poetry, over the last 200 years. I mean, from going into the South after the Civil War and Reconstruction to the Philippines and into Germany and Japan and then into Vietnam and Iraq. And it's really amazing to watch them describe the so-called subaltern people that they are about to conquer and colonize, right? Mm-hmm. Their descriptions are really uniform over the centuries. And that's one of the principal ways in which they describe these people, whether it's a Filipino in 1898 or an Iraqi in 2006, is they're just sitting there doing nothing. Oh, and by the way, even like in New Orleans, I remember like some of the descriptions of the Italians, the Sicilians in New Orleans at the turn of the 20th century. There are all these great descriptions by these, Yankees who would come down to fix the South, of these Sicilians who are just like fat and lazy and sitting on their stoops doing nothing.
Yeah. Well, they're not looking for signs that they are the elect. They're not constantly seeking out proof that they are saved.
They're not moving.
Yeah.
They're not moving forward. They're not moving in any direction. They're just, it's hilarious, right? What does every yuppie in Portland or Seattle or San Francisco tell you to do these days? Live in the moment.
Yeah.
But they're the ones who work in Silicon Valley
or
for Microsoft, and they're constantly moving forward. I think that's exactly why they're telling us, really telling themselves, to live in the moment, because they never do.
Yeah. Well, they've always got some other goal they're aiming at. That's been something that since I finished college, it's like, what am I doing now? Like I've worried about this myself. Like I find myself thinking like, gosh, for so long it was, you need to finish college. Like it's ridiculous that you're who you are and you don't have a degree. And then I got one and I have a job and I have a middle-class salary and, I'm like, well, what do I do now? I don't know. I've been in the working class for so long, looking at this, thinking this is what I needed to get to, and feeling embarrassed. I look at people I went to high school with. I see them on Facebook, and it's people that I know aren't smarter than I am, and they're doing a lot better. And I'm like, man, this is embarrassing. I gotta get up. I gotta get up this ladder. And now I'm here, and I'm looking around like, well, what now? And I've gone back into the church, and I'm trying to get to heaven. And maybe a secularist would say that I've substituted an earthly goal with a heavenly one. I think I've substituted a real goal with a fake one. But
okay, so let's connect those big dots. So 1 minute you're in Baghdad on freedom patrol,
freedom circles,
as a combat medic. And it's 2007, 6?
Yeah, 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the next you're a dad and a white collar worker, and you're all middle class. But there's a lot that goes on in between, right? So you look at the Iraqis, as I understand it, when you're in Baghdad, and see some things that you might even think are preferable in the way they live, and you certainly start to think that this war makes no sense. It's both impossible and not a good idea in the first place. You become not just opposed to this particular invasion and occupation, right? You become anti-war generally, is that right?
Yeah. So what happened was I realized that our ruling class, I shouldn't say I realized, I've worked this out over the years, what I think was going on. And our ruling class presents their warrant to rule as they're really smart, and they know what to do. They know the plan, right? And I think themselves believe that, and I don't think it's true. And they had a plan in Iraq that was just a disaster. And they've had plans repeatedly since that were just disasters over and over again. I mean, at one point in Syria, the United States government was fighting a proxy war against itself on, I counted, 8 different fronts, different US-backed groups fighting each other. So what I realized is that whatever you want to say about the libertarians, in their argument that you cannot have the knowledge required to plan society, and that doing this will continually result in chaos and disaster, I think is basically a true argument.
Yeah, it's a good one. Hayek, isn't it right? The knowledge problem.
Yeah, Hayek, the knowledge problem.
You can't know enough about other people in other parts of society to manage them and organize them. Yeah.
And because our ruling class, they think their warrant is that they're really smart and really educated, they suffer from immense hubris because they think they know things that can't be known and can do things that can't be done. I think that if they thought that they were the ruling class because of the real reasons they're the ruling class, because they were born into particular families that prioritize particular ways of being. I'm reading a book. I'm going to get in trouble just for naming the book. I'm actually reading The Bell Curve, which is like crime think.
Everyone should.
Yeah. And
I think it's racist, but everyone should read it.
I haven't actually.
I don't even mind that it's racist.
I haven't gotten to the racist. I haven't gotten to the racist bits yet.
It is by definition racist, but it's okay. It's fine. I don't care. Keep going.
I haven't gotten to the bits about ethnicity yet. But one of the arguments that he makes is that the upper classes in our society, they live a certain way, but they don't promote that lifestyle to everyone. Like the upper classes in our society, they marry before they have children. Yep. They stay married to their spouse. They raise their children together. They prioritize education. They do these things. But then instead of modeling that to everyone and saying this is we think the best thing to be, they say the dominant thing in the culture is just do whatever makes you happy. Do whatever you want. Go just do whatever you want. And the lower class does that, and it doesn't work out. Because whether you think it's inborn or not, I think you would agree at least that our society is structured a particular way, and particular strategies for living are more successful in it than others.
Indeed. So let me clarify. Okay. Charles Murray's book and Charles Murray's work in general, very little of it is about race or racism, and very little of it is demonstrably racist in any way. It's just not about that. There is a small portion of that book, and there is a small portion of his other work that is just by definition racist, because he argues, and he continues to argue, that there are, first of all, races of human beings, number one, biologically distinct races of human beings, number one, he argues that, and two, that there are biologically determined differences in what he considers to be real things like IQ among those races. Yeah. All of which is determined by biology, according to him. Now, that is just by definition, that is old school, traditional scientific racism. his prescriptions for what to do with that information or that belief are pretty innocuous, as far as I know. He is not calling for things like segregation or the reinstitution of slavery or for pogroms or for expelling groups of people. Fine. Mostly what he's arguing for is a radical reduction or removal of the welfare state, which I think he's got some points about. So my point, his critique, however, as you were saying, of the upper class in this country, I think is often spot on, actually. And for the reasons that you just laid out, that their self-regard, their lack of self-consciousness, and their basically, various modes of imperialism, basically, which are cultural and economic and political, right? Imposing their ideas, their way of life on other people, including not just the Filipinos in 1898, but people like Jonathan Carp in 2017, right? Yep. Just go on and on and on. And they finally got bitten in the ass with the last election, and they're like not knowing what the hell just happened to them.
Well, I would say and you could speak more to how this plays out historically, but I would say in the current day and age, one of the problems they're having is that their ideology about how people should live does not match with the way they live, and the way they live is the best adapted way to live in the society that we live in. And so they are pushing, they're selling bullshit. They're selling lies to the lower classes and saying, oh yeah, you can be whatever you want. You can live however you want. It doesn't matter. Whatever you want to do with your life is great. But they don't do that. And they don't, and the reason they're the ruling class is because they don't do that. They're nose to the grindstone. Don't have children before you're married. Once you're married, stay married, raise your children. They're very almost like traditionalist in their own private lives. But and I think the reason those behaviors are tradition is because, for whatever reason, if you want to say it's biology, if you want to say it's innate, if you want to say it's just because of the way that the means of production are ordered in our society, those are the most adaptive strategies for prosperity and stability and success in our society. But they aren't selling that anymore. If they ever were, I don't know, you would, you're a historian, but they're telling people, you can have sex whenever. There's nothing shameful about having children outside of marriage. There's nothing shameful about, not being married. If you're not happy in your marriage, get a divorce. You shouldn't have to be unhappy. But they don't do that.
Oh, right. Well, okay. Let's see. Let me try to sort this out. So I actually was debating this with another person. So David Brooks makes the argument you're making. Murray makes that argument. There's a professor at Penn Law School named Amy Wax.
Yeah, I heard about this.
Okay, yeah. She makes a similar argument. Let me unpack this a little bit. So here's how I see it, here's how I see it. The current dominant bi-coastal elite, whatever you want to call them, the people who went to the fancy colleges, all right? Let's be specific.
You and your friends.
That's really who, yes. The people I've grown up around until recently, because I've been disowned and I disowned them. But anyway, yes, the people who went, and really, we can be that precise. It is the people who went to the top 200 colleges in this country, as determined by U.S. News and World Report. Those people. Okay. Do they believe in free sex? No, absolutely not. Their stated ideas, I believe, about sex are basically puritanical. In fact, they haven't really veered in terms of what they state, right? From that far from Cotton Mather. They're quite traditional. I'm not sure.
I think in their private lives, but Teen Vogue just published a guide to anal sex. So
yeah. So how many times did Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama talk about anal sex?
I have no idea, but Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. How many times
did they talk about sex?
Part. I don't.
This is what I mean. I'm talking about their public utterances.
Yeah.
In schools, I promise you, in the most bougie, liberal Marin County private schools, no one's talking about sex. I promise you. Not in this way. Not in this way at all. I promise you.
But what I'm saying is, if you have to look at the whole culture, not just these political figures. Like, no, Barack Obama doesn't go on television.
I'm saying in schools. This is where we transmit the culture, right? This is where culture is transmitted. It's in the schools. It's a primary, very small, major.
No, I don't say it's major or primary.
Okay, so liberal. Okay, so I've known a lot of these people. Okay, so just take my word for it. But I think you can even find data on this. But certainly, if you look at curricula in the schools that are all run, public schools, most of them anyway, by these liberals we're talking about, and all these fancy private schools, almost all of which, well, most of which are run by these liberals too. They're not advocating free sex, believe me. And then in terms of parenting, what these people are saying, and they're not telling their kids to go run around and have anal sex.
They're not telling their kids.
They're not telling people to be promiscuous.
They're not telling their kids.
I have been around them. I have lived among these people.
Watch TV, man. Like,
that's a different thing, John. It's a different thing. So there's always been this split, right? I think that what you and Brooks and Wax and Murray are pointing to is this split in the culture, which I agree with. There is a split. So there's popular culture. Guess what they don't do? These people who went to the top 200 colleges, they don't watch those TV shows. Of course
not.
Okay, good.
Yeah, they just sell them.
Fine, sure. They work at the studios that make them. Absolutely. No doubt about it. Okay, so that's what I call popular culture. Mm-hmm. That's what your people consume. That's what your people at least watch, right? Okay. The people who didn't go to those top 200 schools. The formal, what I call the formal culture in this country, which is what the politicians say, what the big business people say, what the newspapers say, what the school teachers say, is still remarkably and fundamentally, I believe, unchanged. So that the discourse coming out of people in formal positions of authority in this society are saying things about sex and the family and work pretty much exactly what George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were saying.
To themselves. You yourself said
I'm talking about publicly.
But the lower classes does not consume the formal culture. You see polls all the time. People don't know who their senator is. They don't know who's running for president. They're vague on who the president is, but they know who Kim Kardashian is. They know exactly who that is. Yeah. And that is how working class culture is inculcated. It's not inculcated in schools. Working class kids don't give a shit about school, but they give a shit about what they see on TV, what they hear on the radio, and that pushes dysfunctional family dynamics, dysfunctional behaviors that lead to suboptimal outcomes. If a poor girl from South Louisiana, where I'm from, acts like Kim Kardashian, she's going to end up in a trailer with no future, on welfare, and just hard up. She's not going to, but that's the lifestyle that's sold to them. Now, we can argue why is that lifestyle sold to them? I think it's sold to them because the fundamental purpose of our society is making money, and the easiest thing to sell is sex. So they just sell it. And whether it was deliberate or not deliberate or accidental, the upper class understands that that is not what you do, and you don't expose your children to that. You don't watch the Kardashians with your kids because that's trash. Trash acts like that. But the reason the trash acts like that, in part, is because that is what's sold to them.
Boy, I see some contradictions here. So
probably, yeah.
Well, no, not just in you. So, okay. Have you heard of The Cultural Contradictions of Capitalism, Daniel Bell? Have I talked to you about
I don't think so, no.
Okay. So that's really what you're talking about, I think. And so I think your finger is on something really important here. I just want to make it clear and make sure that I want to see if we agree on this, or you and Daniel Bell and I agree on this at least. For him and for me, capitalism is contradictory. It's not a coherent system, actually, very oddly, but it's just simply contradictory in that it does two things simultaneously that are at odds with one another. So there's the production side of capitalism, the making of things. Now that requires tremendous discipline, right? To either own a factory or to work in a factory just requires a lot of discipline. You got to get up at the same time every day. You got to go sit in this box all day long. You got to do all these things that your body doesn't want to do, right? You got to force yourself. It requires Puritanism, he said, Daniel Bell said. I think he's completely right. So the production side of capitalism is puritanical. And so that, to me, accounts for what I call, not him, but I call the formal side of American culture, the things that the politicians and the bosses and the teachers tell us to do, because that side of capitalism requires that. Okay. Now, the hilarious, it really is, sort of hilarious irony here is that simultaneously, of course, at least in the last 120 or so years, is that the things they're producing, the capitalism is producing, is a direct frontal assault on all things that Puritans hold dear, right?
Yeah.
So we are just pumping out Kim Kardashian and her ass and Kanye West and whiskey and cars that can take you on vacation to places where you do no work at all and don't ever think about work. And we have the pornography industry is larger than Hollywood now, and on and on and on, right? So it is simultaneously, Daniel Bell said, puritanical and hedonistic.
Yeah.
Isn't that just weird? And I don't know what else to do with that except to say that one could write a really interesting history of the United States of America if one were to look at it through that lens.
Yeah, I think so.
See what I'm saying here?
Yeah, but I think the
that it is an ongoing civil war between Puritanism and hedonism, that if one were really savvy as a historian, they would go back and just sort of look at American history, looking for that particular fight between, you know, like puritanical people and hedonistic. Yeah. Jonathan, do you know where I'm going here?
I think.
Thank you. Okay, keep on. Continue. So what does that make sense? Does that
it does. Okay. But I think, and this is something that I don't have access to data to because I was not born into the upper class, but it has always been puzzling to me since I realized the contradiction, how these people justify to themselves. Like I am selling a product to children that I would never want my children to consume. Like I couldn't do that. Yeah. And maybe that's because I'm a sucker, but if I were making something for kids and I didn't want my kids to do it, I couldn't make it. I couldn't live with myself. But I think that the evidence in our society is that there's some class of people that do and can. They produce entertainment that they themselves would never consume and that they certainly would never expose their children to. But the pornographers are a great example. Mm-hmm. How many pornographers do you think let their kids watch porn? But they put it all over the internet for everybody to see.
Sure. Agreed. Yes.
And I don't know how those people live with themselves. Maybe I'm simplistic.
How does capitalism live with itself?
It doesn't very well, you know.
It's just a binary that's never unified.
Yeah.
I think we just have to accept that some things are just a conflict and always will be.
But what interests me,
or at least so far have been for a long time, and you know, it just may never be resolved.
But that conflict exists, and I never met one.
It makes the world really interesting now once you have that idea about how this society works. Since I read Daniel Bell's essay, I see everything differently, and it's just a way more interesting world because I see that fight in everything. Well, as you know,
but the conflict
read my book, John.
Yeah, the conflict.
Which I know you did. You were one of the very first people to read my book. That's why I was teasing you.
The conflict exists in individuals. Like there are individual people.
That's it. That's what I'm saying.
And yes, I've never met one, and I want to ask him, like, what the hell is going on in your head? Because I've never met one. I'm not exposed to these people. I don't know them. If you ever interview a pornographer, ask him if he would let their children watch pornography.
Yes.
And if not, why are you okay with just pimping it, pushing it everywhere?
Yes.
Like, why are you okay with that? I don't get it.
Yes. I knew a pornographer.
You interviewed one. I heard the episode, actually.
Oh, 3. Oh, right. 4. Sorry. Well, I've interviewed. So Connor Habib is a porn star. He's not a family man, though. That's for sure. So he's got no conflict at all. Anna Aerosmith is a porn producer.
That's what I heard.
She has no children. But there is. We didn't get into this in that interview. But that'd be interesting. There are certainly some contradictions there, I think. Not quite the ones you're talking about. Then there are 2 people you don't know about and no one else knows about, really. But one is a former, one of the most important, powerful pornography producers in history, who I knew through a friend. And he was not, I wouldn't call him puritanical, but he was all about work, and he had kids. And I don't know what he said to his kids about sex or watching porn, but I'm pretty sure he didn't preach it to them. Mm-hmm. And I also know that his kids, and I'm glad I didn't name him, so this is fine. His kids, at least one of them, became a heroin junkie right away, like in his early teens, and the other one I think had similar problems. But yes, there was sort of a living contradiction. In other words, the stuff he's pumping out at the very least contradicts the way he lived his life. He did not live anything like people do in porn videos, because he worked all the time and was sort of about just having a very rigid, simple, hard, so to speak, life, being simple work life. That's what it was about.
Yeah.
And following rules, he was no criminal. Mm-hmm. So I just think people do that. Don't we all do that? Don't we all have that contradiction inside of us? Don't we all have a Puritan? Hang on. Don't we all have a little Cotton Mather and a little devil inside of us?
Maybe it's because I'm a Catholic, but I don't.
Don't you?
I don't feel like I have a Cotton Mather inside of me. Like maybe it's the Catholic thing. I don't know, but like I don't. I would not personally do something, work in an industry that I thought was harmful to the society that I live in.
Mather talking. That's what I'm saying. You just proved that he's in you.
But I don't then turn around,
or Pope Francis, one or the other. I mean,
well, the thing is these Puritans. The thing is they work in industries that they, through the example of their own lives, whatever they would say, clearly don't think are good for society, but they push these things out anyway. Mm-hmm. And I guess maybe you would say I'm all Cotton Mather. Oh, I don't know, but I wouldn't do that.
You're moving there. You're moving there fast. You have been for a few years now.
Sure, maybe.
So let's talk about that though. Okay. Let's go back to this. So mm-hmm. Okay. So you're in Baghdad, you're a combat medic, you decide the war sucks, you become anti-war, you leave the army, you move to where? Tacoma, right?
Yeah, I just stayed in Tacoma. This was my last duty station, Tacoma.
Okay,
yeah.
So you're there, you leave the army, and you immediately, become an anti-war activist, don't you?
Before I even got out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, very brief. I don't want to like puff myself up. It was maybe 6 months before I got out. I wasn't risking much.
But what were you doing?
Talking at events. I know there was the IVAW was
Iraq Veterans
Against the War. Yeah, was the dominant anti-war organization for people like me. Mm-hmm. Although I later learned that as an actual honest to God combat veteran of the Iraq War, I was like a vanishingly small minority in Iraq Veterans Against the War. A lot of them had never been to Iraq, had never deployed, had only been in the military very briefly.
Oh boy.
But I would go to things and
wait, hold on. I didn't know this.
You didn't know?
I'm not totally surprised, but I didn't know this.
Yeah.
So what do you make of that?
Well, I think that remember we talked about live not by lies. I think a lot of these people do, and they're looking for anything to give them status and a reason to say something, and just saying, I think the military does bad stuff and I'm against it isn't enough. But if you can say, if you got kicked out of I'm not going to say his name because I don't know the legalities of saying this sort of thing, but there's a guy who was very senior in the Iraq Veterans Against the War who was kicked out of the Coast Guard for desertion in like 2000. And he was not an Iraq veteran of anything. I don't really even think of him as a veteran. Like you had a job for a bit and then they got rid of you because you sucked at it. But they needed that status. They needed to be able to say, yeah, I'm a veteran and I'm against the war. And am I not interesting? And there was a lot of that sort of social climbing going on in the organization that just kind of repelled me.
What's really amazing is that is widely believed in my world to be victimhood. He is an oppressed victim, heroic, a martyr, really, for doing that. When in fact, in my world, okay, not at NASCAR races, not at the Republican National Convention, but in my world, he's a champion. He's a hero. He's nothing. That's nothing but a great thing. He has simply moved up the ladder. Yeah, by claiming that.
That's what they're doing.
There's basically not only no risk, there's nothing but reward.
Yeah.
Once you establish yourself or simply claim that you have been treated that way by something like the military, you can be the head of an organization.
Well, and the thing is, the objective facts of it are like if the organization he was involved with was called McDonald's and not the Coast Guard, then he went and got a job that he didn't like and quit without telling anybody.
Right. Like, I'm just saying. So before the 1970s, though, mm-hmm. that really would have been a disaster for him. That really would have been a calamity. He really would have been oppressed. He would have had nowhere to go where anyone would give him any favors, any benefits, any jobs, any raises, any income, anything, any positions if he were really a deserter from the Coast Guard. But right now, in my world, that just puts you at the top of the ladder.
Yeah, he's a hero.
So there's this incredible inversion that's gone on.
Well, and that causes a lot of resentment.
But people don't even, but them saying, this is to your point, mm-hmm. right? What was thinking about living lies or whatever. Like mm-hmm. that, it's so deep now that we still live in my world, the people in my world live mm-hmm. still in as if it's 1955.
Yeah.
But it's not at all. Mm-mm. Right. So, and this is really clear with race. So that in the minds of the people in my world, Black people are still in Birmingham with the dogs chasing them in the streets.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, it's quite something.
Well, I think, it's interesting that you say like
a mass
they're living in
or delusion or something.
They're living in an alternate universe, because one of the things that is humorous to me is I see leftist stuff on Facebook and so forth, and they'll talk about some show or whatever, some TV character or whatever will be gay or trans or whatever, and they're like, this is so brave.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, no, it's not.
Right.
Like, you're getting praise from all the people who control all the cultural megaphones in our society.
Oh my God, yeah.
This doesn't require an enormous amount of courage.
So okay, let me finish this, and I want to get back to your story though, because it's really important, I think. It's all about context. And in our culture, in our society, in the United States now, there are multiple contexts, and they're very different contexts, right? Mm-hmm. So the campus of Harvard is a thing. It's a very different context than, I don't know, walking in the street in Ferguson, Missouri. Okay. Yeah. Very different contexts. At Harvard, at Yale, at Columbia, in the places I've been, in the contexts I've lived in, I guarantee you, I will say this to everyone publicly over and over again, being black is nothing but an advantage.
Okay.
It just is. You get moved ahead in every way. You get moved to the head of the line in every way, whether in admissions as a student or to get jobs as a faculty member, to get tenure, to get promotions, all of it. It is only an advantage. It will never do anything but work in your favor, being black, in those particular contexts. Okay. Now, in other contexts, like in the street, at night, in South Central on Crenshaw Boulevard, no. It would be much better to be white.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's all. I just want to get that out there. But that's the thing. No one cares. No one cares about particular context. They just want to make everyone into either a victim or an oppressor. But yeah, sorry. So you're in this organization, and it's full of these people who didn't really serve in Iraq.
Yeah.
But now that doesn't change your mind about the war, though, has it?
No, it didn't change my mind about the war. It changed my mind about that organization.
Yeah, and about the left more broadly.
Yeah, and the left. I was kind of just like IVAW, whatever it once was, it is now just another big leftist money pit for grants. It originally was Iraq veterans specifically against this war specifically. And now it's basically people vaguely associated with the military who believe leftist things is what the organization. Right. They have positions on like immigration and stuff. What in the hell does that have to do with Iraq veterans against the war? Yeah. But it's the total picture and imperialism, and they tie it all together in the leftist narrative. But what they also did doing that is there are a lot of honest to God Iraq veterans who are honest to God against the war, who don't buy the whole leftist thing, who don't want anything to do with this organization.
And guess what they've done? They've alienated all those potential extremely valuable members of an anti-war movement that does not exist, maybe in part because of that.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I agree with you. Now, let's talk about what we were supposed to talk about the first time.
Okay.
So you dropped in there that you became a Catholic, or you were a Catholic, you grew up as a Catholic, and now you're back to being a Catholic, and you're very serious about it after being an atheist for a while during your anti-war IVAW leftist.
Most of my 20s, really, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You said you were an atheist, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And now you're definitely not, and you're very much part of the church, right? And you're very much a family man. You have 2 kids, and you're married, and you're a white-collar worker, and you're good, upstanding American citizen. Now, there was so for a while there, you went from sort of a anarchist, wild man atheist to that, but in between, you did this little, and I'm still trying to figure out if this was a cause of it or if it was just the way you made this move from your past to the present. But several years ago, you were one of the very first people to take any notice of this thing we're now calling the alt-right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to say up front, I'm not a member, never was. I've never been a member of the alt-right.
I am not now, nor have I ever been. It's kind of actually, that's really what's going on now. It's really new McCarthyism. Yeah. I've had several people on this show who have been associated with the alt-right who I've had to think really hard, and I've been really worried about it, that it could sink the whole show. It could sink my career. I could have no income. I could be, because simply by talking to these people. But anyway, So like in 2014, right? You started doing
2013, 2014, somewhere in there. Yeah.
Right. That's when no one was talking about it.
Yeah, nobody, it hadn't even really coalesced into a thing yet. Richard Spencer had coined the term sometime in the long ago. But really, so what happened was, so you had gotten me that job at C4SS.
Hold on. What did I do?
You got me that gig at the Center for a Stateless Society.
Oh, what's that?
It's a left anarchist and market weirdo people.
Right. They're basically communists who pretend to be libertarian.
Yeah, they're basically communists who pretend to be. Yeah, I'd written something. You tried to get it published in Reason. Nick Gillespie wouldn't email you back. You sent it to the guy at C4SS. He published it. They gave me a job. They were paying me. I was like, great, sure, I'll get paid. So I was kind of vanity Googling the organization. Like who are these people and what are they to do with? And I found a website called therightstuff.biz, B-I-Z, that was like savagely attacking C4SS. And I was like, it was, I don't know, their attacks weren't all coherent.
Just so we're clear, we're talking about one organization of 8 or 9 guys attacking another organization of 8 or 9.
Yeah. This is like a one tiny group blog.
All of whom live with their mom.
Yeah, I don't know if they all live with their mom, but they're one tiny group of guys going after another tiny group of guys. And I found
there you go, everyone. That's radical American politics for you.
Yeah,
on the left and the right, that's all it's ever been.
Yeah,
pretty much, with a couple of tiny exceptions. It's been just little tiny groups of dudes.
Yeah,
in their mom's houses.
So I'm
yelling at each other.
I'm reading their attacks on the C4SS people. A lot of them are very personal, and I'm 100% that some of them were personal. They know each other, like from the libertarian movement, because what the alt-right comes from is, there was the whole Ron Paul libertarian thing, and that was ultimately frustrated. And some of them went and joined essentially the left. Became C4SS, Kathy Riesenwitz, what's his name, Jeffrey Tucker, all those people, and some of them.
These are well known. If you're a libertarian, you know these people. These are sort of have been identified as sort of leading left libertarian figures, which means that their politics look a lot like sort of typical lefties. Yeah, but they also believe in markets.
Yeah, that's basically it. And then you had some who went right. And they started thinking that maybe the reason libertarianism wasn't working is because it didn't take into account what they saw as certain essential facts about the human race. Maybe it would work.
Human races.
Human races. Yeah, I guess you should be clear on that. At first, they thought, we have to. It's legitimate to drive out leftists because leftist ideology is an inherent threat to us. And then they started saying they crossed the red line in American society and said, you know what, maybe there are races and libertarianism could work, but it could only work with white people. And once they went over that line, they were kind of cut off. They were by themselves because they're now toxic.
That will do that. Yes.
And what happened essentially is I found this website attacking this other website. And I've always I mentioned in the past episode, I find people who are radically different ideologically from the dominant society kind of interesting in their own way.
Me too.
And so I wasn't going like regularly. I wasn't a convert, but I would check in every so often and see what these people were up to. I was kind of interested. And then I noticed like they had a little blog roll and there was more and more stuff on it and it was getting bigger and they were starting to affect the news and show up. And essentially what happened, and it's regrettable to be honest with you. The problems I have with C4SS, they aren't these people. When the Ron Paul movement split, the left libertarian side of it essentially just died on the vine. They're still talking to each other, but not doing anything. And the people who went right have been growing and growing and growing and
apparently
growing.
Elected the president.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know, but
so they did pretty well. Apparently,
they did. I guess. I mean, but they're. How do I describe them? So because they are, I was telling your producer this earlier, because they are persona non grata, because you can't talk to them, because you can't engage them, you can't take them seriously. They only talk to themselves. And so that only leads them in one direction. They just get more and more and more extreme. When I first saw that website, the rightstuff.biz, it was a little bit edgy, right-wing libertarian, Lou Rockwell tier stuff. Now they're full on
only vaguely racist.
Yeah, and now they're
not explicitly racist.
They're full on anti-Semite conspiracy theory. Like they're completely gone all the way that way. Their podcast is called The Daily Showa, as in the Daily Holocaust. And they have their explanation for the title, they say, well, the left loves to mock the things that are important to us, so we mock the things that are important to them. And maybe it started that way. Maybe that was the original theory for the title. But I mean, they're pretty explicitly, unambiguously like virulent anti-Semites at this point.
At least in terms of what they're saying. If you take people seriously as to what they're saying, then they are definitely anti-Semitic. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And what has been unearthed?
I'm sorry. Just the question is whether they're just putting that all on just to be provocative.
So I think some of them might be, but I mean, there is a significant proportion of them that are not. They internally would distinguish.
Do you think they really hate Jews and they really hate Jews? They really think Jews are evil?
If they don't, they are bound and determined to give the clearest possible impression that they do.
I just want to hear these things. Like I just laugh because it's so ridiculous. I mean, I heard what's his face, Chris Cantwell, the most famous alt-writer these days, alt-rightist these days.
He's in prison.
Talking on that video, that Vice video. I don't know if you saw it in Charlottesville.
No, I didn't watch that.
So he was kind of the star, the anti-star of this video that Vice News put out about Charlottesville. And he starts talking about Jared Kushner and how it's disgusting that Jew is married to that beautiful girl. I'm like, really? Come on, dude. You don't actually think that.
They do. I mean,
okay. All right.
I again, like, I'm not inside their minds.
Yeah.
But if it's a put on, it's the best put on I've ever seen. Like they're internally very consistent.
Yeah. Well. Okay. Okay. So.
Go ahead.
But you're saying that they went from being sort of soft, maybe possibly semi-racist, to being hardcore, explicit racist because
I think the way that we respond to those sorts of arguments in our society is not with other arguments, but with just moralizing and ostracism. So if somebody naively looks at our society and says, gosh, Black people have higher poverty rates. They have, their officially reported crime statistics, whether or not you believe them, are higher than the officially reported crime statistics of these people. And they naively conclude, well, Black people must be violent and stupid. Like, we don't come at them as much. We do to an extent, but we don't have a whole lot of patience with like explaining the argument. That's bad, and you shouldn't think that.
Right.
And I think that as a society, I wasn't alive at the time, but as a society, it almost seems like we took that as a shortcut back in like the 60s. And instead of convincing people like, no, you shouldn't be racist because of reasons, we just said being racist is bad and it will make you socially unacceptable. And so on the one hand, it gives them a lot of their power. They're forbidden. They're dangerous. They're edgy. They're scary. They're out there. Andrew Anglin is effectively banned from the internet.
Who's that?
The editor of what's it called, The Daily Stormer, which is named after Julius Streicher,
a real
Stormer,
Nazi,
a real honest to God Nazi hung for war crimes at the end of World War II.
Right.
And he's effectively banned from the internet. They chase him from domain registrar to domain registrar.
I was just listening. I was hearing about this recently. This Daily Stormer it's only on tour, right? Like you can't.
Yeah,
there's no host. There's no country that will allow.
Yeah,
they've gone to Algeria and then Iceland and
China,
they tried to
and
find hosts, and no one. They can't have a website.
Yeah, and you would think. I don't know. It seems obvious to me. Amazing. Like if you tell me whatever you do, don't read that. What the hell else am I going to want to read?
Right.
Especially if you're young. And they're making the reaction to them. Like I said, it gives them their power. It's why they're why they grow, why they attract recruits. And because predominantly, I don't want to say always, because there are people out there who are making, the real arguments against this ideology. But the predominant response in our society is moralistic condemnation. And that makes people who are already persuaded of something feel justified. Like if we different context. If we're talking about gay marriage, right? You support it. I'm a Catholic. Obviously, I don't. If you come at me with, you don't like it because you're a bigot and you're bad and you're mean and you're evil, my thought is like, I feel more justified in my belief now because this person who believes this thing that I think is wrong is frightened of my belief and is attacking it. If you come at me and say, well, what about this reason and that reason, we have a conversation, then maybe you persuade me, maybe you don't. But what you don't do, unless you do a really bad job with the argument, is reconfirm my beliefs the way that you do if you come at me like I'm the biggest monster in the world.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Anti-racism has become a part of American religion.
Yeah, it is. It is a religion.
The American religion. And that started, I've said this in other episodes, that started, I have found out, and I'm writing about this now, with World War II. So they had to justify sending, an entire generation of young men to fight and die in these places that these young men had never even heard of. And they didn't want to go, right? We know this. Isolationism, so-called isolationism was strong. And there's just this people they were willing to give money and arms to the British, but they certainly didn't want to send their boys to those places as of 1941.
Yeah.
I mean, this was Roosevelt's whole problem because he was gung-ho to go to war. And the American people did not want to send their 19-year-old and 20-year-old sons to these places that they didn't care about. And then, so these anthropologists I was telling you about, and others, all academics, by the way, at Harvard and Yale and Columbia and Berkeley, started writing books and articles and giving speeches and lectures and teaching in their classes that racism is a terrible, terrible thing. And it is a fundamental American duty that even the founding fathers, they said this, would believe in or did believe in. It is our duty as Americans to fight it wherever we can find it in the world. Wherever it is in the world, it is our duty, it is our birth obligation, not our right, a birth obligation to go and destroy it. And that's the kind of word they use, destroy, annihilate. And they actually ended up convincing, Pearl Harbor certainly helped, but once the war started, that was the primary justification, at least for the war in both the Pacific and certainly in Europe, was that we are destroying this Nazi regime. And what's the problem with Nazis? People don't say, oh, well, it was their corporatist economy and the fact that they had, government officials regulating their businesses and, right?
Yeah.
It was that they're racist.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's all you need to know about them. Mm-hmm. So it is such a crime to be racist that you have to be eliminated entirely. That's what the argument was with the Nazis. So that justified having 500,000 of our boys die for this thing, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that's pretty important. And so, with the civil rights movement, then it really becomes just religious thinking. And it's almost as if it's part of our DNA, right? Good God, being racist is really the worst thing.
Yeah. It's like cardinal sin in our society.
And we don't think about why.
No, we don't.
We don't think about why. It's like pedophilia. We don't think about, we don't know that, first of all, pedophilia wasn't a thing until the modern age. People didn't care one way or the other about it. Just wasn't, no one cared about it. But why we now think we don't even think it, we just feel it. It's like instinctual that it's just the worst possible thing. And that person must be eliminated from society.
Well, you talked about them saying that it was a founding value. And you hear this a lot in our society. Like it's just not our values. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I said earlier was that the left undercuts itself because they predicate themselves on lies a lot of the time. And like if you look at the founding fathers, the first Naturalization Act in 1790 specified that citizenship was restricted to white people of good character. So to say deporting the Dreamers isn't our values as Americans and it goes against our founding values, well, no, that's not true. Like it goes along with our founding values as Americans, and maybe you have a problem with our founding values as Americans, and maybe you want to change them, and maybe I agree with you, but we can't just claim things that aren't true as our reason for doing things, because then when people see through the lies, where do they go? They go to Richard Spencer and all these other people who will tell you what they think and are trying to base their arguments on facts as they see them, and their analysis is unsophisticated, and their approach is, I think, fundamentally flawed in a lot of ways, because they ascribe to individuals. They how do I put this? They make race more important than it actually is.
Right. Even if they're right, and I don't think they are, but even if they were right, that there are certain characteristics that are to some extent biologically determined. They sort of talk as if everything is biologically determined. So the way one uses a particular word is because of their biology, because of their race. Yeah. Okay.
It becomes their all-purpose explanation for anything. And I think,
which is guess who they sound like there.
Who's that? The Marxists?
Yeah. Leftists. Identity politics, right? People have said this. I'm not the first. All they did was they just took the identity politics of the left and then just turned it around. That's
absolutely what it is. It's identity politics for white people. All it is.
Because on campuses, all we're told is how fundamentally important one's race is.
Yeah. And so their race is important to them.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Jesus Christ.
The problem is, like, we're moving into I think a perilous time in our society. We're becoming a genuinely meaningfully multi-ethnic society. There have always been multiple ethnicities in America, but there for a long time there was an overwhelmingly dominant Anglo-German majority that ran everything, and their culture was the controlling culture. And there were other little groups that did whatever and were oppressed or not oppressed or whatever as the case may be. But now we're moving into a time where, that Anglo-German majority is not really a majority anymore. I just saw a thing the other day. White Christians are now 43% of the population. 40 years ago, they were 80% of the population. So what you're having, I think, is because there's so much focus on race and inborn biological identity in American society from the very beginning, because the key was, as you've talked about in your work, distinguishing between the people who could be enslaved and the people who could not be enslaved. And this is how we construct race. People see themselves in these racial characteristics. And people, especially, I think, young white men who and I have one at home, in his context, this has been a multi-ethnic society his whole life. He has always been one ethnicity among many. And because we have such a racialized cast to our society, and not him in particular, but the young white men of his generation see themselves as an identity group, as an interest group, that they have their interests they want to advance, and other groups have interests they want to advance. And what we don't understand is that the answer to that, the immediate leftist answer is, well, Black people and Hispanics were repressed historically, and your people were not repressed historically, but people don't live historically. They live their individual lives. And when you tell, a young white guy, yes, you are at a disadvantage in college admissions compared to, Blacks or Hispanics who get the same test scores and grades for you, but that's okay because history doesn't mean shit to him. He doesn't care. He feels like he's getting screwed. He gets angry and resentful. And who is the only people in our society who will even acknowledge that he has any right to feel angry and resentful? The worst people, the literal Nazis. And if you say, yeah, you know what, that does suck. Like I feel like I'm going out on a limb right now, even saying that this is a problem, that these people might have a legitimate resentment, that might be something they can legitimately be upset about. I don't think the solution is genocidal violence or segregation or whatever. I don't know what the solution is, but I don't believe that we can't live together. But I don't think that pretending that the problems that arise from living together aren't problems if your ancestors were in the dominant group is going to be sustainable.
Yeah. I think I agree with all that. I was just thinking as you were talking that this kind of connects to really the beginning of the conversation. It connects to what we were saying about modern life and what it is to be a human being in this society, whether you talk about it as a capitalist society or a liberal society or whatever it is. I think about all of the times I have seen or read about these so-called alt-right people in person, in flesh. I mean, usually they just sort of exist as disembodied avatars, right, on Twitter or whatever, which also I think speaks to what I'm about to say, is that what I almost always see and what I always hear being described in terms of their lives is that they're really, really lonely.
Yeah.
And they've been, and if you hear them talk about their lives, and you can tell it's genuine because they don't intend, I don't think, to put this forward, but what you hear is them being pushed out and pushed away and shunned and pushed back into their mom's house.
Yeah.
Both, as a consequence of sort of the economy of the United States in the last 10 or so years, but also you hear them talk about, well, I went to college, but I was told that, white people suck and I was bad because I used the wrong word in class once. Whether this is their fault or they have Asperger's or it's the fault of the system or SJWs or whatever, it's just, I see, and again, I don't want to be speaking on their behalf, but it seems to me, I could be wrong, seems to me, there's a whole lot of loneliness and isolation going on there. And so if I'm right about that, then what they have found in this politics, maybe above all, is an identity and a place to belong.
Well, that's what they want, is an identity. They want to belong somewhere. And if you think about identities as like a hierarchy, right? Your racial identity is kind of, even if you even acknowledge that it exists, and kind of the point that I'm making is kind of buttressed by the fact that that's even a dispute, is kind of the shallowest level of identity that you can have. Your religious beliefs, your institutional commitments, the professional organizations you might belong to, the social organizations you might belong to, all these things are, I think, more give a stronger identity than race would in a society where people pursued all these things. So like I'm a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers, I'm a member of the Knights of Columbus, I'm a member of all these things. So the fact that I'm white, like, does it matter to me? Well, I guess if people start going after white people, it would matter to me, but otherwise I don't think about it a whole lot. I think about my other identities and my other commitments. But you have all these young men, they have nothing else.
Yeah. So when you were a voyeur basically, right?
Yeah.
Right. You were just looking in from the outside and you didn't. Yeah. Is this correct, John? You didn't join on?
No, I didn't.
And you weren't sympathetic, or you were just curious?
I was, how do I put this? I saw them, and I want to distinguish between the leaders like Richard Spencer. Richard Spencer is a social climbing opportunist. He wants to be important. He went to University of Chicago and Duke, and he found himself rejected in his attempt to enter the ruling class. And he has found another way, a movement he's trying to run out in front of. Whether he's sincere or not in his beliefs, I don't know, and I don't care. But the foot soldiers, the people, whom were being identified when they were marching in Charlottesville in the white polos and the khaki pants, they're nobody. They don't have anything. Right. The reason they're doing this is because they don't feel like they have anywhere they belong. And they find belonging with each other. Yeah. And I think that, young men in large groups are pretty dangerous, whatever their race and whatever their social standing. If you have packs of young men without any older guidance running around in the street, they're probably not doing things that are conducive to social order. And we have a society now where we have, like I said in the past episode, we've been so dedicated to creating this human resources slurry. We've stripped people of all these identities. We've atomized them. And now they're anxious. They need something. They need anything. And what can't you take away from them? Well, what are they born with? The color of their skin. So some of them are grabbing onto that. And that's what I am. And that's why I have all this anxiety, because society is anti-white, which sounds insane. But when you step inside their world and see things the way they do, you understand kind of why they feel that way, but it's not what they need is belonging and guidance and a functional culture that will give them something other than I'm anxious, and I'm anxious because the internet said that it was Jews who do all this stuff to me and make me anxious. And it's sad and it's shallow and it's insane, but I don't think that we will make any progress about them by screaming at them and telling them how bad they are. That just tells them that they're on the right path because they already see themselves as repressed and the enemy.
Yeah, I'm already sort of regretting what I said about them being lonely, because this is one of the things I have preached for many years is don't speak on behalf of other people. And I just sort of did that. I think I qualified it enough, but let me just say this again. I don't know whether they're lonely. I suspect that's a possibility, but here's one thing I do know. They are, at least until very recently, powerless.
Yeah, well, they were,
at least in the formal society, right?
They were, but they
may not be now. I don't know. That's an open question as to how much power they actually have now. How many of them there are, and I just don't know. You think that they really? They
manipulate the media pretty effectively. They like
or the media essentially created them.
Yeah. Well, the classic example is the echoes meme. Have you seen this? The triple parentheses thing.
Oh yeah.
They put around Jewish names. Yeah. Right. So their whole thing was, if only people could see how prominent Jews are in like media and society, they would wake up and realize what we were going to do. So their plan was, we're going to essentially get them to identify themselves. And they did. They started this echoes meme. They got everybody worked up about it. And now they're, for a while, I don't know if it's still going on, but the hip thing for Jewish intellectuals and media figures to do to show that they weren't afraid was to put the parentheses around themselves. And
because they're victimized by
and the thing is now from the alt-right's internal perspective, they thought, they were acting like, we just got them to all put the yellow Star of David on their own shirts. Yep. Look at us. Aren't we great? And that certainly isn't what the people who did it had in mind, and we can discuss whether or not it was effective as I don't know that it was particularly effective as a propaganda tool, but they set an aim and they achieved it, and they do that a lot. And I think the mistakes people make about the alt-right, they think they're stupid, and they're not stupid. They think that they're incompetent or incapable and can't do things. They're not. The Right Stuff website I talked about that started out as a couple of dudes who were butt mad at a couple other dudes, they just started an independent media company. There are 3 people on that site who make their living now, and one of them supports a family entirely on subscriptions to their racist podcast. I mean, that's not incompetence. Yeah. That's not bumbling buffoons in the basement who we don't have to worry about and are clownish.
Yeah, I just wonder how much of it is essentially been created by the media overreaction to Trump and that phenomenon.
I think the media, there's definitely a dynamic with the media.
Yeah.
Richard Spencer is a great example. They get him on TV, right? Why do you put Richard Spencer on TV? Because he's going to say shocking and horrible things.
I guess I don't see, I could be wrong. I don't see any evidence to suggest that they're going to take over any part of our formal culture anytime in my lifetime. I don't see, a television network or even a major podcast or a university ever being run by Richard Spencer or anybody who follows him.
I think that there's a small but non-zero chance of that. I think the issue is, so as I said earlier, as we become this multi-ethnic society, and politics in multi-ethnic states historically is frequently conducted along ethnic lines. Like in Belgium, there's the Flemish parties and the Walloon parties, and they have their different ideological orientations, and the Flemish socialists will cooperate with the Walloon socialists, but they're separate. They're their own thing. If the only way that white people pursue their interests is in these incredibly toxic alt-right groups, if white people remain a discrete ethnic group in our society and they're always, no, you cannot see yourself as an ethnic group. If you do, you're bad. Then they're going to become the white party. Like I can't pronounce his name. The guy for The Atlantic, last name Coates.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, yeah.
He wrote an article about Donald Trump as the first white president. And I think in a sense that was true. I think I don't agree with everything he says in his article, but I think Donald Trump was elected because by white people acting consciously as white people and not seeing themselves as, one of the things they say white privilege is white people can just see themselves as American. Other people are this or that, but they're just American. And what's happening is white people.
It's a decent argument, by the way, which I have used many times myself.
And I think it used to be true. And I think for my generation, my generation might be the last generation for which it was true. Because honestly, I don't really see myself as ethnic. If I think, what is your identity? Well, I'm an American. But as white people cease to be this overwhelmingly dominant majority, I think if our culture continues to be so fixated on race and racial identity, white people will see themselves as a discrete ethnic group with their own interests. And if we continue down that path and say, like, we continue to racialize everything, and so white people become racialized, and B, we say that white people cannot legitimately pursue any group interest, then the only people doing that will be the alt-right, and they will continue to grow. So our options, I think, are twofold. One, this is the best option, I think, is we could try to move away from the racialization of everything in our society. We can address ourselves to problems like poverty, to problems like crime and that kind of stuff, and try to get away from everything being racialized all the time. And then that would remove the root problem, I think. Or B, we can accept the idea of legitimate white group interests in this country and not just reject them all as inherently evil and bad. And then people won't cross that red line I talked about earlier and get just sucked up into this spiral of ever more extreme groups. I mean, you've been around fringe political movements. The person who is the most hardcore has the most social leverage when you're outside the political mainstream. And it's exactly what happens with them. They're completely ostracized from mainstream politics. Nobody talks to them. They only talk to each other. And so the person who is the most ideologically pure, is like a magnetic effect. He pulls. It's on the left you've got Bob Avakian, and I used
to live near. I grew up right 2 blocks from Bob Avakian's.
Yeah, and he's
in Berkeley. He's the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party. Yes, Maoists. Yes,
and they're the most. They're ideologically pure and rigid, and they have a pull. If people go looking for radical leftism, that them and other far left groups like that, end up sucking those people up because that's the end state of that. And you have the same thing going on the right, except the difference is there's this line where there's no coming back. Like if you go become a member of the alt-right, you can't come back. And if you do, like your whole identity now is like atonement and shame.
Yeah.
And so they don't come back. They just go over there and they stay over there.
It's like you can't change your race.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just thinking about, again, one of the first things you said in this interview, which I think might be my favorite thing you've ever said. You were talking about how modernity is about measuring people, measuring the world, and then not valuing the things that can't be measured by our means of measurement. And I'm thinking about how that has been applied to human beings, how human beings have been measured, and this is only in the modern age, measured and then sorted. That's another thing that's gone on, right?
Yeah.
Because you talk about the human resources slurry again.
Yeah.
So the way that human resources departments deal with human beings is very much this way. We measure them, their output or what they represent in terms of what they look like or how much they can produce. And then we sort them. We put them in particular positions and occupations and functions. Well, so that's what racism was.
Yeah.
So with Thomas Jefferson and the Notes on the State of Virginia, and then a whole bunch of scientists, because that's what they were at the time, they started to literally measure people's skulls and their bodies and essentially measure the hue of their skin and then sort them into races. Well, okay. There's a thing that goes on there also that's just, it's mean. There's a meanness to it. You know, meanness is about like reducing things.
Yeah.
And that's what goes on. It's, and I feel like in a way that's kind of your whole life has been like a struggle against that.
Yeah. I don't want to be.
But you kind of been drawn to it and simultaneously struggling against it. So the military is the prime example, of course, of measuring and sorting people. But you found some solace there because there was no anxiety. There was a sense of belonging, just like the thing that it's what race gives to people too.
Yeah.
A sense of belonging, an identity. So they can escape the atomization of our society and find belonging in a community, even through this. This is just all sorts of paradoxes here, right? Through this, the products of this measuring and this sorting, right? That the modernity creates these categories through this mean measuring and sorting of human beings, but these categories can be filled. You can go there and find other people who are your height or your color or your size, right?
Yeah. Well, people look for identities and a place to belong, and they're never going to stop doing that.
But you finally ended up, well, we don't know where you're going to end up, but you are now in a place where there is no measuring and sorting of people, which is the church.
Right. Yeah.
And there are things that are valued in, especially the Catholic Church, that can't be measured.
No. There's
no ruler on earth that will measure them, that the church, and it sounds like you, value. And, I ain't religious, and I got all kinds of fancy critiques of Catholicism and Christianity and all of it. I've always kind of liked the Catholics. And I think in part because whenever I go into a church, I feel something, a Catholic church, not a Protestant. And when I go into a Catholic church, I feel something. And there's certainly a belonging that's obvious, that's really attractive and almost intoxicating. But it is this kind of thing that Catholics have been trashed for since the Reformation, which is that it is kind of just all superstition. It's just all irrational. It's just based on nothing. It's like there's this book and maybe you read it and maybe you didn't, and the priest is going to tell you what's in it and we're just going to believe that and go along with it. But I kind of like that, because it offers this place outside of this whole world of sorting and sifting and measuring and meanness and atomization. That's a place where you can belong and maybe find an identity that feels authentic.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, so, right? That's where you are now.
Yeah. I think that Catholicism is fundamentally pre-modern. It is not a modern.
That's its whole shtick.
Yeah. It's an anti-modern religion, and I mean, we do weird things like listen to priests chant in languages we don't understand. And, and why do we do these things? Well, I can tell you the what do they call it? The emic, the internal logic of it, because I am a Catholic. But I think what you're picking up on is that it sets us apart from society, but it doesn't set us against the society. We believe as Catholics that the world was made and is good, and that we should appreciate the things of this world. You know, the Calvinists believe in total depravity. Everything created is bad. It's all horrible. It's a nightmare. Yep. We don't believe that at all. We believe that
hey, you guys drink wine.
Yeah, we drink in church.
When you're praying.
In church, yeah. And
the priest drinks with you.
And our churches are supposed to be beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And
the music has to be beautiful.
The music is beautiful.
The churches are beautiful.
Yeah.
Aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
Right. That's not a Protestant thing. That's not a modern thing even, really. No. Yeah.
It's pre-modern. And
sure ain't a Puritan thing.
No.
Yep.
It's pre-modern, and it is not, how do I put this? It's in its original form, in its fullest sense, it becomes an ideology in our culture because we live in an ideological culture, and there are definitely ideological Catholics, and there's definitely a Catholic ideology, but it is really a way of being and a total way of life. And I struggle with my sins and try to better myself, but I'm not here to beat you over the head and tell you like, this is the only way to be, and you have to be like me. I can tell you, this, I think you would do better if you did this, and maybe not as good if you did that, but we are all sinners. We are all people in this world, and we're trying to be better than we are, but we don't have the sort of pat answers that I think more ideological religions have.
Well, you can't prove any of that stuff. You can't show me any evidence.
Well, you can't prove anything other than...
I know, John. I'm agreeing with you. Listen, so here's you agree with this. At the heart of modernity, and pretty much anybody who studies this agrees with this, is rationality or rationalism.
Yeah.
Or the belief that rationality is the best way to apprehend the world and how we should organize. We should organize the world around rationality, right? Mm-hmm. So the Catholic Church is not modern. It's pre-modern. It's not irrational. It is non-rational.
Yeah, it's not rationalistic.
Yeah. So what you believe, thank you. So what you believe, what you talk about, how you, the eating the wafer and the wine, pretending it's the blood and the flesh of this guy.
Pretending anything.
Well, whatever. Yeah. Or if you just believe it, that you can't prove that. It's certainly not rational in the modern sense, right? So I completely agree with you. It's pre-modern, and that is not even news to anyone, I don't think.
No,
right?
I don't think so.
That's kind of
that's what's wrong with the Catholic
That's exactly
Church.
what's wrong with the right. So here's the other thing, though. It just occurred to me, and I'll leave you with this.
Okay.
It is certainly pre-modern. Guess what I think the Catholic Church might also be?
What's that?
Post-modern.
How do you mean?
For those very reasons. So the postmodernists, and we don't have to spend so much time on this. I just want you to think about this, okay? Because I know you don't like the postmoderns. That's really, when you talk about the Catholic Church, you sound like Foucault, because that's kind of his thing. It is both a way of being that is pre-modern and non-rational, and it is often, certainly in the hands of someone like you or Anthony Esolen, is a critique of modernity and rationalism and the meanness and the sorting and the measurement of human beings that goes on in modernity and because of modernity. So that's a postmodernist critique, and it's even a postmodern way of living. Well, believe it or not. So I know you're not a scholar of Foucault, but
I've read some.
And this just occurred to me as I was speaking to you, because that's what you do to me, man. You make me make connections that I've never made before.
We see in the Catholic Church is, and maybe this is what you're addressing, is that there's a fundamental mystery and fundamental something we can't know about being.
Mystery.
And
exactly.
So we have doctrines like the Trinity and the transubstantiation, which I believe are true, and you maybe believe aren't. I'm sure you don't believe, but
no, I don't know. I'm an agnostic. I don't know.
But what they are is
mystery.
in a way they are an acknowledgement that there are just things that we cannot and will not ever know, and cannot and will not ever understand, and. So the postmodernists would just say the same thing that they would say that about everything, that we can't ever know for sure. A good postmodernist, I believe, someone who really has read Foucault and agrees with him would say, maybe everything the priests are telling us is true, but we don't know, and we probably never will know. Postmodernists are essentially agnostic. They're not atheists. They're agnostic about everything. Yeah.
So I know you're not quite there, but I think there's a whole lot. I guess that's why actually. And now I get it. That's why I really not only respect, but feel solidarity with people like you and Esselin and Jordan Peterson.
Oh, well,
there
thanks.
you go.
Yeah.
Well, we did it again. Hey man, thank you. God, it is so fruitful talking to you.
Thank you.
For me, I don't care about anyone else. I don't care about you. I just get so much from it. I really do. I mean, it's pretty clear. I think if you know my work and have followed me at all, you'll see that in the course of my conversations with you, I make connections that I've never made anywhere else. So,
well, thanks.
All I can say is thanks, man. And you didn't make me cry this time. That's a success, I guess. Well, no, that's a failure. Next time.
I can tell you stories about the jail next time.
Oh, we didn't get to that. Nope. There's Carp 3. There we go.
All right.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, everybody.
If you want to support this show, there are 2 ways to do it. You can make a simple donation by going to thaddeusrussell.com/podcast, or you can become a supporting listener of the show and a member of the Unregistered community by going to unregisteredunderground.com. When you become a supporting listener, you'll become a member of a private Facebook group where every single day we talk and argue about the issues and ideas from the episodes of the show. You'll also get discounts on Renegade University videos and courses, including the upcoming webinar on postmodernism, and on our new unregistered merchandise. Again, to become a supporting member of the Unregistered community, please go to unregisteredunderground.com. This was the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell.